He spent millions on doctors, but a waitress without a degree saved his life. Want to know how? Stay tuned and hit subscribe, you won't believe what happened next. William Carter had always been in control. He ran a multi-billion-dollar empire, his every move precise, calculated, and powerful. Boardrooms bent to his will, and people trembled at his presence. But now, in a sterile, dimly lit hospital corridor, all that power seemed meaningless. 6 months. 30 doctors. Millions of dollars. Private jets. Experimental treatments. And still, no answers. His body had betrayed him. What started as a small, unexplained illness had grown into a relentless, all-consuming nightmare. William's health had worsened so rapidly that he could no longer trust his own body. He could no longer walk without feeling the burn of exhaustion. No one had an answer. It could be neurological, one doctor had suggested. An autoimmune disorder, another had offered. Maybe stress, a third had proposed. They all sounded sure, but none had an answer, and with each passing day, William's life seemed to slip further away. He felt himself weakening, physically and mentally. His fingers shook as he took a sip of water, but even the simplest of actions seemed like monumental efforts. For the first time in his life, William felt powerless. The sound of footsteps approaching snapped him out of his thoughts. He raised his head, his eyes searching for the source of the noise. A young woman appeared in front of him, a waitress dressed in a crisp apron, holding a tray of sandwiches and a glass of water. She noticed his pale face immediately. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked gently. William tried to ignore her, the soft concern in her voice unsettling him. He looked away, pretending not to hear, but the woman didn't back down. "You don't look fine," she said bluntly. "I've seen you sitting here for 3 days now. You're paler than before. Are you getting treatment?" Her words pierced through the fog of his confusion. He let out a bitter laugh. "Treatment? I've had more doctors than I can count. They all failed." The waitress raised an eyebrow, her expression never wavering. "Maybe the answer isn't complicated," she said, her tone steady. "Sometimes the solution is right in front of you, but people overlook it." William chuckled darkly. "You're a waitress. What could you possibly know about my illness?" She didn't flinch. "You're right," she said. "I'm not a doctor, but I watched my mother die because her doctors missed something obvious, an allergy to a food they never tested for. Maybe you need fresh eyes on your problem." His eyes narrowed as he studied her, seeing nothing more than a young woman, dressed in a plain uniform, trying to offer him advice. "Why do you care?" he asked, his voice rough with frustration. She met his gaze without hesitation. "Because you look like a man who has no one left to care for him," she replied softly. "And no one deserves to suffer alone." Her words hung in the air, and for the first time in months, William felt something besides pain and exhaustion. He felt seen. Something inside him stirred, a flicker of hope he hadn't allowed himself to feel for a long time. He looked up at her. "Tell me your name." "Elena," she said. "Elena, do you really think you can solve what 30 doctors couldn't?" She smiled faintly. "I'm not saying I can, but I can listen. And maybe that's a start." William hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Fine, sit." Elena sat across from William, her eyes focused on him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "Tell me everything," she said. "When it started, what you eat, what medications you're on, even what detergent they use for your bed sheets." William raised an eyebrow. "Detergent?" he repeated, his voice tinged with disbelief. Elena nodded calmly. "Sometimes the smallest thing is the biggest problem," she said, her voice unwavering. "Please just humor me." William found it hard to argue with her. He had already tried every possible solution and had nothing left to lose. He sighed deeply and began recounting everything he had been through. The dizziness. The fatigue. The rashes that came and went, the constant 4 drips that seemed to offer no relief. He described the experimental treatments he'd undergone, the countless tests that showed nothing. As he spoke, Elena took notes on a napkin, her questions sharp and precise. "Do you feel worse after meals?" she asked. "Do the rashes itch or burn? Do you sleep better at home or here?" William answered each question hesitantly, not sure what they would reveal, if anything. Yet, as she continued to ask these simple, yet profound questions, he felt something shifting. She wasn't like the doctors. She wasn't trying to diagnose him. She was simply listening. At the end of the hour, she sat back, her expression thoughtful. "This might sound crazy," she began, "but I think you're allergic to something in your four." William blinked. "Impossible," he said, shaking his head. They've run allergy panels. Elena didn't look convinced. Maybe not for everything. I've seen this before. A man in my neighborhood almost died because of a preservative in his medicine. They never tested for it until someone suggested it. William felt a flicker of hope, mixed with fear. Could it really be that simple? You want me to stop the 4? He asked. Elena paused before responding. Not yet. Ask them to test for the preservatives in it. If I'm wrong, no harm done. But if I'm right, she let the words hang in the air. William felt the first real sense of relief in months, not from medicine, but from this stranger's quiet certainty. William sat in his hospital bed, his thoughts racing. Elena's words echoed in his mind. If I'm right, the possibility that the answer could be so simple, so obvious, was both frightening and relieving. He hadn't considered the possibility that something as small as a preservative in his fork could be making him sick. He had trusted the doctors, trusted their knowledge, but none of them had asked the questions Elena had. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that in all their tests, no one had ever looked at the entire picture. He turned to his assistant, who was nervously standing by the door, waiting for orders. Find that girl, William said suddenly, his voice firm. I want her here tomorrow. His assistant looked confused but nodded. Yes, sir. William's heart pounded with a strange mix of anticipation and doubt. What if she was right? What if the answer had been right in front of him all along, hidden behind the walls of his own desperation? He had spent so many sleepless nights with doctors telling him what was wrong, what it could be, but never what it actually was. Maybe Elena had just given him the one thing no one else had, a fresh perspective. He wasn't ready to give up yet. He couldn't. The next morning, he sat up in bed, his mind made up. I want every ingredient in my 4 fluids tested, he instructed, his voice sharp. Down to the preservatives, stabilizers, and saline solution itself. Don't leave anything out. The chief physician hesitated. Sir, we've already run allergy tests on the usual substances. William cut him off, his frustration rising. Do it. I don't care how redundant it sounds. Check every goddamn molecule. Hours passed as William sat in his private hospital suite, his mind racing with a mixture of doubt and hope. His body ached from the hours of inactivity, but his mind was sharper than it had been in months. The usual silence of the hospital room was thick with anticipation. His assistant, clearly nervous, moved about, checking on the progress of the tests. But all William could do was wait. Wait for a breakthrough. He glanced at the door every few minutes, expecting someone to walk in with the answer. But the door remained shut, and the minutes stretched into hours. Finally, around midday, the head doctor entered, looking visibly shaken. William sat up straighter, feeling the weight of his words before they were even spoken. Mr. Carter, the doctor began, his voice faltering, we found something. William's stomach twisted with unease. What is it? He demanded. The doctor hesitated before continuing, there's a stabilizing compound in your 4. It's rarely used, but we traced it. He looked down at his notes. You're highly allergic to it. The allergic reactions have been compounding every day, worsening your condition. William's heart stopped. You're telling me I've been poisoned? He whispered, his voice hoarse. Slowly? Unintentionally? The doctor nodded grimly. Yes. No one thought to test it because the allergy is incredibly rare. It's why none of the standard allergy panels picked it up. William clenched his fists, his body trembling with a mix of rage and relief. He had been slowly dying, and no one had even considered the possibility of something as simple as a preservative. Stop the 4 immediately, he said, his voice barely a whisper. It's already done, the doctor reassured him. You should start recovering within days. We'll flush your system carefully. William sat in his bed, his hands gripping the sheets tightly as a wave of emotion washed over him. He had been to the edge of death, and it wasn't a doctor who had saved him, it was Elena, a waitress with no medical training, just someone who had cared enough to look at the problem with fresh eyes. The thought made his chest tighten with both gratitude and disbelief. Find her, he said, his voice cracking. Find Elena. His assistant nodded immediately, but William's mind was elsewhere. He couldn't shake the image of Elena, sitting across from him, asking those simple yet profound questions. She wasn't a doctor, but she had noticed what everyone else had missed. She had saved his life, and now, William was determined to thank her, to find her, and to offer her something in return. His assistant quickly left the room, rushing to carry out his orders. The hours seemed to stretch on endlessly. The hospital room, once so oppressive, now felt strangely empty, as though William's world had shifted. He had been surrounded by wealth, power, and doctors, yet it was a waitress, someone with no formal education in medicine, who had seen what the others hadn't. How was it possible? The thought gnawed at him. By late afternoon, William's assistant returned with news. "We found her, sir. She lives in a rundown apartment on 9th Avenue. Works 2 jobs. We tracked her down." William didn't wait for his driver. He took the keys himself. He wasn't going to wait another minute. Elena had saved him, and he would find her, no matter what it took. William drove himself through the bustling streets of the city, his mind fixed on Elena. The apartment building she lived in was far from the luxury he was accustomed to. The paint on the walls was peeling, the stairwells dimly lit, and children ran barefoot in the hallways, playing in the shadows. As he climbed the stairs, he couldn't help but feel a strange sense of discomfort. This wasn't the world he was used to. This wasn't the polished, controlled environment of his boardrooms or the luxury of his private hospitals. He reached the door of apartment 3B, his breath catching in his throat. He hesitated for a moment, unsure of what he was about to find. Then, with a quiet knock, he waited. The door creaked open, and there she was, Elena. She looked as though she had just finished her shift, her apron stained from hours of work, her eyes tired but kind. "Mr. Carter," she whispered, her voice barely audible. William swallowed hard. He hadn't been prepared for the flood of emotions that hit him in that moment. "You saved my life," he said, his voice cracking. "I don't know how to thank you." Elena didn't say anything at first. She simply stepped back and motioned for him to come in. "I'm glad they listened to you," she replied quietly. "But I never thought you'd come looking for me." William followed her inside, his gaze sweeping over the small, modest apartment. It was simple, nothing like the mansions he was used to. He felt out of place, standing there in his designer clothes, surrounded by the remnants of her hard work. "Why didn't you come back to the hospital?" he asked. She hesitated, looking down at the floor. "I didn't think you'd need me anymore. I'm just a waitress." Her words cut through him, and William's heart sank. He reached out, gently lifting her chin so she would meet his eyes. "Don't say that," he said softly. "You saw what no one else did." Elena stood still as William's words sank in. She had never thought much of herself. To her, she was just a waitress, a person working tirelessly to make ends meet, someone who had learned to survive through struggle and hardship. But standing in front of William, seeing the raw emotion in his eyes, something shifted within her. "You saved my life," William repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "You didn't just help me. You gave me back my future." Elena shook her head, almost disbelieving. "I just wanted to help. I never thought it would lead to this." William stepped closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "You did more than help. You gave me hope when I had none left. No one else saw what you did. And now, I want to make sure you know how much you mean to me." Elena felt a lump form in her throat. She wasn't used to being valued, to being seen as anything more than the girl behind the counter at the cafe. But William's words made her feel something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of worth, of importance. William continued, "I came here today to ask you something. I want you to work for me, not as a waitress, but as my advisor." Elena blinked, stunned. "Your advisor?" She could hardly process the words. "But I'm not qualified. I don't know anything about business or anything really." William smiled, a faint but genuine smile. "You have instincts no doctor, no scientist, no expert I've met has. And I trust you. I've spent my whole life surrounded by people with degrees, with credentials. But you, Elena, you saw what no one else did. You listened, and that's something money can't buy." Elena's hands trembled, her mind racing. She had never considered a life outside of the cafe. She had never thought of herself as capable of doing something so monumental. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because you care," William said simply. "When no one else did, you cared. And that's something I want in my life, in my business, and in the world." Elena's heart pounded in her chest. Could this really be happening? Was she truly being offered the chance to change her life, to change the world? She looked at William, his face filled with sincerity. "Come with me," he urged gently. "Help me build something that saves lives, just like you saved mine." Elena stood frozen, the weight of William's words hanging in the air. She had always been an outsider, working hard just to make ends meet, never imagining she could be part of something larger. Never imagining someone like William Carter, a billionaire, would ask her to be part of his world. But here he was, standing before her with an offer she never thought possible. "You're serious?" she asked, her voice shaky with disbelief. William nodded. "I've never been more serious in my life. I trust you, Elena. You have a rare gift, something no one else has. And I want you on my team, not just as a part of my business, but as someone who will help me make a real difference in the world." Elena felt the world shift beneath her feet. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She wasn't just the girl who had cared when no one else did. She was something more. Something bigger. She had spent her life in the shadows, but now the light was shining on her. "I don't know what to say," she murmured, her heart racing. "You don't have to say anything yet," William replied with a warm smile. "Just think about it. This is your chance to do something important, to help people like you helped me." Elena took a deep breath, the emotions swirling inside her. She had never been given a choice like this before. A chance to change her life, to make a real impact, and to be valued for who she was, not just what she could do. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady now. "I'll work with you. I'll help you build something that makes a difference." William's face broke into a smile. "Thank you, Elena. You won't regret it." As she looked at him, she realized that this wasn't just an opportunity, it was a chance to be part of something meaningful. A chance to help others, to use her instincts to make the world a better place. And it all started with a simple act of kindness, a waitress who listened when no one else did. Weeks passed since Elena agreed to work with William, and things began to move faster than she could have imagined. Together, they founded a new initiative, one that would focus on overlooked health issues and provide support for people who felt lost in a broken system. The foundation's mission was simple: to listen when no one else would, to care when others turned away, and to bring real change where it was needed most. Elena was amazed by how quickly the foundation grew. It wasn't just about money or resources, it was about something far deeper. The personal touch, the genuine care, and the dedication to finding solutions that worked for real people. She wasn't just a figurehead in a corporation anymore. She was a vital part of something that had the potential to change the world. And with every step, every phone call, every decision they made together, Elena felt a sense of purpose she had never known before. She and William worked side by side, building a vision from the ground up. They visited hospitals, met with patients, and worked with teams of doctors to find practical solutions to complex problems. Elena's ideas and instincts became the heart of their work. And as the foundation expanded, so did her confidence. William, too, began to change. He was no longer the cold, calculated businessman who ran his empire with an iron fist. He was still determined, still passionate, but now there was a kindness in him, a willingness to truly listen, not just to the experts, but to the people who needed help the most. The two of them made an unlikely team, but it was one that had a profound impact on the world around them. As the foundation grew, so did the impact of Elena and William's work. They received countless letters from people whose lives had been touched by their initiative. People who had once felt invisible now had a voice. People who had suffered in silence were finally being heard. Elena couldn't help but feel a deep sense of fulfillment as she read the stories of those who had found hope in the Foundation's mission. It wasn't just the medical breakthroughs they had facilitated or the financial support they had provided, it was the fact that they were changing the way people viewed healthcare and, more importantly, the way people viewed each other. Elena had never expected to be at the center of such a movement, but here she was, a driving force behind a revolution in how people cared for one another. William was right. Her instincts had proven invaluable. She had never been trained in medicine, and yet her ability to see what others had missed made all the difference. People in positions of power and influence began to take notice. Their foundation's work had caught the attention of medical professionals, philanthropists, and even government officials. And yet, despite all the accolades and recognition, Elena remained humble. She never lost sight of the reason they started this journey: to help those who couldn't help themselves. To listen when others wouldn't. William, too, had found a new sense of purpose. He was no longer driven by money or status. He had built his empire on wealth and power, but now, with Elena by his side, he understood that true success came from making a difference in people's lives. Their partnership was a true meeting of minds. Elena's passion and empathy, combined with William's resources and influence, created something truly special. Together, they had become a force for good, one that was changing the lives of countless people. As the foundation expanded, it became clear that Elena and William had built something much greater than they had ever anticipated. Their work had touched thousands of lives, and their legacy was beginning to take shape. Hospitals and clinics across the country began to model their practices after the Foundation's philosophy, listening to patients, not just treating symptoms, and addressing the root causes of their struggles. Elena was often invited to speak at conferences, sharing her journey from waitress to advisor, from invisible to invaluable. Every time she spoke, she reminded others that change doesn't always come from the most obvious sources. It can come from the quietest voices, the ones that are often overlooked. William stood by her side at every step, proudly supporting her as she stepped into her new role as a leader in the healthcare movement. He had once been a man who defined himself by his wealth and power, but now he was a man who defined himself by the lives he had helped transform. Together, they had created a ripple effect that had spread across communities, organizations, and even governments, encouraging others to prioritize empathy and human connection in their work. As the foundation reached new milestones, William and Elena reflected on the unlikely path that had brought them together. It had started with one simple observation, one person who cared when no one else did. That moment had changed everything. They had both learned that the power of kindness, the willingness to listen, and the courage to challenge the status quo could create a legacy that would outlast any amount of money or prestige. In the end, it wasn't the wealth or the power that mattered most, it was the difference they had made in the lives of others. And as they stood together, looking out at the work they had built, Elena realized that this was only the beginning.